A young boy watches his mentor and crush get publicly humiliated before her execution. After 10 years of imprisonment, he finally returns to enact bloody revenge against the people who perpetrated these actions. That right there is the making of a plot that could really hook me. I'm a sucker for a good revenge story about shitty people getting what they deserve, and Kingdoms of Ruin is certainly the illusion of that. The first episode is incredibly tragic and had me seething over it for a whole week, which kind of proves that it was an effective pilot, but even then the signs of its impending slide into almost hilariously bad writing were still there. And as the second episode turned into Adonis making the dumbest play he could against the Radiant Empire, I realized my hopes for this show were entirely misplaced. The story itself intrigued me at first, with humanity turning on its benevolent protectors out of hubris and betraying their kindness. But as time dragged on, it felt like it lacked the finer finishes of good writing, failing to play off any significant emotional tones and charging through plot points at a breakneck speed. That's to say, it doesn't give anything time to really take hold in your heart before it tries to hit you in the feels. But all it ends up doing is making the series feel way too tragic or edgy. Because of that, it doesn't take long for the series to pretty much lose its plot and ditch anything that looks remotely promising. There's also the issue of Adonis being an irredeemably evil protagonist that makes it hard to watch. Look, a good revenge story featuring a twisted protagonist who dances close to that line without realizing it certainly intrigues me. But the way this one has him outright doing things that are outright evil just turns me off, especially as it rushes through what arguably would have been the best part of the series: Adonis's lone wolf battle against the Radiant Empire. But even without the overall plot issues, there's hardly a likable character in this show. As I said, Adonis is objectively evil and is completely fine with killing civilians, crossing the line between good to evil, and has no redeeming moments that make him remotely a likable character. It tries to portray Adonis as the result of tragedy, but he really just feels like every villain in a shonen who tries to use evil as an excuse for more evil, except his is far less compelling because the writing never really gives you a chance to ponder his actions. Except this time around, it's far less compelling because the writing never really gives you a chance to ponder Adonis's actions or reasons. Everyone else is pretty much either boring or irrelevant, since they're hardly on screen long enough for you to even develop a deep attachment to them before they get killed off. And considering you need something to actually latch onto in order to feel any of the tragedy or edge, this story falls pretty flat on emotional notes a good revenge story needs outside of the first episode. It really should have spent more time focusing on Adonis fighting the Radiant Empire alone, because it then would have had time to establish the pain he feels at the loss of his master, as well as showing the abhorrent state of the dystopian Radiant Empire. Dorica is later thrown into the main cast, but she's not given good enough writing to be the opposite of Adonis, like she needs to be. The plot attempts to paint her as this light of mercy in a dark world, but her character only gets a few small moments amid a raging storm of bad anime to make her remotely appealing. And ultimately, she falls flat too because she quickly develops plot armor just to cuck Adonis. And the story itself turns out to be an amateurish mess. It has a kinda cool magic versus technology thing going, but gets way too scientific with the way magic works and makes it boring and dumb. It does resonate with the part of me that loves a tragic story, but it quickly delves far too deep into far too many details and side objectives that feel totally rushed. And because of the state of the first episode, it feels like it's quickly turning away from its initial quest for revenge and instead setting off on what feels like side quests just to establish some unneeded points of drama. It attempts to field some major plot twists and cool developments, but it's so basic and easy to read that I literally called every major plot twist after the first episode. The witch is still being alive, Adonis having a tracker implanted in him, Dorica's revival, the true ruler of the Radiant Empire being a witch who wanted the other witches out of the way so she could rule the world herself. And the animation is absolutely nothing worth your time, as most of it is frozen frames of combat and low energy, low effort kind of stuff that makes it look like an unloved project, especially when stacked up against some really good stuff this season like Shangri-La Frontier, Frieren, and Jujutsu Kaisen. This means that it's not even entertaining solely for action, and the only form of entertainment I've seen people get out of this is from laughing at how miserably bad it is. All that said, this really is just one of those absolute stinker anime that I can't recommend to you. It's just outright bad. The sad thing is that, like I said, this could have been a half-decent show if it had just fixed some of its flaws. But it rushed into the witches issue, and decided not to give Adonis a whole arc where he fights the Empire on his own before discovering where the other witches are. In that time, you could have had Dorica tracking him, performing random acts of kindness to establish her character, and ultimately trying to recruit him to the side of resolving conflicts in the world. An offer he quickly and repeatedly refuses in favor of his revenge plan against the Redian Empire, up until he learns that there's a way that Chloe can be brought back to life. Dorica could then serve as a great opposite to Adonis, a witch who detests the path her people took, but chooses goodness rather than evil, while Adonis is a human who detests other humans and looks to destroy them as revenge. Then, it would only be after a long and hard battle that it would be really rewarding to the viewers to learn of the existence of a colony of witches and that the object of Adonis's eye could be brought back, something Dorica hopes to avoid, knowing it will only lead to more war. It also needs to portray a more humane side of Adonis to balance out his bloodlust. Give him a code of ethics or something that prevents him from just killing senselessly. It would have given Dorica something to draw out of him as a character. On top of that, the witches' issue was handled way too awkwardly. I can agree with them being spiteful towards humanity after being betrayed. Their position should be the extinction of humanity, one they would need Adonis's quill and powers for, hence why they would want to bring him to their colony to use him to revive Chloe. And this option would come at a time when Adonis is truly starting to see the lines between his revenge and being the same kind of murderer that the Redians are. And all of this setup would lead to him having to choose between bringing back his master to satisfy his own selfish desires, or sticking to his master's beliefs and trying to resolve the endless conflict between witches and humans. And because of the aid of Dorica, he could end up a redeemed character when he chooses to fight to end conflict with as little bloodshed as possible, rather than turning over his powers to those who would destroy the world. What this story needed was to take its time and ease into the larger issues at play, but it blew its load right off the bat and showed too many cards prematurely, forcing me to lose interest in the story as a whole once I recognized how everything was going to play out. It also fails to endear me to any characters, which makes any attempt at hitting good emotional notes a massive failure. As most of the characters are so poorly written, it makes me wonder whether or not the studio producing this series was to blame for a bad adaptation, or if the manga was just this bad to begin with. In the end, it was too hasty for its own good, and wasted what potential it had. I give this anime a 3 out of 10. It isn't the most lazy or most cringeworthy writing I have ever seen. It also isn't the worst animation I have ever seen, but it still doesn't redeem itself after letting me down so hard and being an otherwise trash anime. I genuinely wish I had the time back that I spent watching this. But at the very least, the intro to this one is one that I think is kind of cool and have added to my playlists. I guess I can count that as a bit of a consolation prize.